So in one of the last couple of videos, somebody had asked about foot position and had asked me to change the camera angle so they could see my foot position a little bit more. And then somebody else had said something about techniques and sort of like, what I think about while I'm riding, like what stuff has been helpful in sort of like building up my confidence riding over the last few years. So yeah, I wanted to just go over a couple things, riding techniques, like while we're headed home today. The first one being foot placement. So there's a couple of main considerations when we're thinking about foot placement on the board. Ultimately, we're standing sideways, but we want to be looking forward. So along all of the joints in our body, running from our feet all the way up to our head, there's going to be some amount of twisting. And depending on how we stand and how we place our bodies, we can adjust which parts of our body are twisting, and we can adjust what type of control we have over the board. And we're going to want to be able to adjust these things based off of the riding conditions, what type of terrain we're trying to go over, whether we're turning, going straight, whether we're trying to carve, whether we're trying to go fast. So there's sort of a spectrum of foot positions that we can adopt, and those go from the two extremes, either a perfectly perpendicular foot position where our feet are pointing directly sideways, or on the other extreme, we can have our feet pointing pretty much as far forward as we can without completely falling off the pads. Now, each of these extremes can be used for different types of riding and in different environments. And of course, we can choose anywhere between those two extremes to place our feet. So starting off with a perfectly perpendicular foot position, we have our feet square with the board, pointing perfectly sideways. And that places our knees also perfectly sideways to the board. Going up the body, that also places our hips perfectly sideways to the board. So that means that the bending in our body that happens when we're riding this way is really along the carving line, side to side. Now, this can be extremely useful because it gives us a lot of fine-grained control over our movement side to side. So,
that is so fire.
Thank you. So if we're trying to carve, if we're trying to make tight turns, having a super square stance like this can be really beneficial. However, if we're trying to go fast, this can start to become a hindrance, because when we're trying to lean, if our knees are pointed sideways, then the only way we can lean is either by leaning our whole body over the board, like this, or we can push our hips out forward, like this. So this creates a couple concerns while trying to go fast, right? Because if we're trying to get down low, then that really puts our butt out over the board this way, and it doesn't give us a lot of easy movement forward and backward. So it's harder to recover from a nosedive, and it's harder to get in like a nice squat position that's going to be comfortable for a long distance. So let's switch over to the opposite extreme, and we'll move our feet to a super hard angle, pointing as forward as we can. Now, our knees, when we bend our knees, it's much easier to get our knees to bend forward instead of to the side of the board. Now, the main direction of our leaning is in line with the board. So now we have much less stability side to side, but a lot more stability forward to backward. When you want to get in a crouch, when you want to be able to recover from a nosedive really quickly, and when you want to be able to quickly shift your weight forward and backward, then all of that is in line with your joints pointing forward. So what are some of the downsides of riding with your feet facing forward? Why not just do it all the time? Well, as I mentioned earlier, riding with your feet pointing forward adds a lot of instability to the side-to-side direction. So you can see the wobbles are now solely controlled by the side-to-side twisting of your ankles. And this creates some challenges because now instead of the wide part of your foot being in line with the board and having like a lot of fine-grained control over the tilt, now it's the narrow part of our foot that has that control. And it's also adding this extra element where the point at which we're balancing on the board is offset. My back heel is now more on the left side of the board, my front heel is on the right side. So this also means that leaning back is also going to put pressure on the left side of the board. Leaning forward is going to put it on the right side. So now we've added this extra element where instead of being able to easily separate out the front and back leaning and the side to side leaning, we've sort of combined them. So we can see that both of these riding styles, either fully forward or fully sideways, they both have upsides and downsides that we can pick and choose from depending on the conditions of the riding and depending on what we want to be able to do on the board. So in general, I like to have somewhat of a mid-foot position where I'm not facing all the way forward, but I'm not facing all the way sideways. And this allows us to have a little bit of the benefits of both of those extremes. So on the back foot, we have a foot position that's close to perpendicular. So this gives really a lot of side-to-side control. And then on the front foot, we have a foot position that is pretty much close to a 45-degree angle. And this allows the knee to bend out forward and have that front-to-back control. In addition to this, I also like to pull my front foot off to the right side of the board a bit, and then have my back foot off to the toe side. And this really gives an extra layer of control over the board because now our front foot has a nice edge over the right side of the board and we can really lean into it when we're going right. And then our back foot has an edge on the left side and then we can really lean into it when we're turning left. So with a angled foot position like this, when we come up to a turn, we're not going to have quite as much side-to-side control as we would if we had a perfectly perpendicular foot position. So with that in mind, oftentimes if I'm coming up to a turn, I'll change my foot position a bit to make it a bit more perpendicular so that I really have that nice side-to-side control for a good stable carve, good stable turn. This really allows to have all of that forward back ankle strength in line with the direction that I'm trying to have the most stability in. And then when I'm ready to go fast again, I'll move back to a little bit more angled in the front. Some other situations that we might want to change our foot position a bit is if we're going up to, say, do a curb nudge or do a drop, especially if we're going to do a little trick sash. You'll want to be able to move your feet back and forth depending on what obstacles you're coming up to, what terrain you're riding over, stuff like that. So let's talk about the different ways that we can start to get comfortable with changing our feet position while we're riding. The main thing that we need to consider is that we need to still be able to balance our weight across the wheel, both on the front pad and the back pad. So in order to move our feet, we can't just pick one foot all the way up, but we can pick up one heel, right? Or we can even pick up a toe. That one's a little bit harder unless you have very flexible ankles. But I can easily pick up my heel almost all the way and still have a decent amount of stability while riding. So the easiest way to move your feet around while you're riding is simply to pick up your heel and then pivot your foot. And this will allow you to move your foot around just like so. And then you can also do the same in reverse where you're not actually picking up your heel all that far, but just de-weighting your heel just enough where then you can pivot around the toe. And this way you can do a little shimmy. You can, if you're trying to get out on the pad, you can shimmy out. If you're trying to get back in, you can shimmy in. Or if you're just trying to change your angle, you can do that pretty easily as well. The other option is you can just jump with both feet at the same time. And you can move in, you can move out. You can hop around. And then you can see that This one's a little bit more sketch while you're going fast, but it really does allow you to just switch your foot position quite quickly with both feet at the same time. So yeah, I think the main thing that I would say about foot positioning is that there is no one perfect foot position for any given situation or any given terrain. So even throughout a single ride or a single trick session or whatever you're doing, you want to be able to feel comfortable in just moving your feet around to whatever foot position suits the situation the best. Instead of thinking about the exact foot position that you want to take for any particular situation, try to just focus instead on getting comfortable with moving your feet around while you're riding, because this will really just allow you to naturally move your feet and just find whatever position feels the best on your board, find whatever position feels best in the moment for whatever type of riding you're doing, and everything else will just kind of flow from there. And then once you start getting into trying to work on specific techniques, then you can really sit there and focus on what might be precisely the best foot position to have for that certain aspect. But in general, the main thing is just to be comfy, right? So whatever foot position is gonna make you feel the most comfortable while you're riding is the foot position that is gonna be the best for you. So definitely just take some time to experiment, take some time to play around, and just like any riding technique, the main thing to keep in mind is that there's no perfect way of explaining this stuff. With any trick, with any riding technique, with any of this stuff, what we're trying to communicate isn't words. Like what we're trying to communicate is the physics of the board and how we move our body in relationship to the board. And that can't really be encapsulated in words because there's too many dynamics. So, we all try to do the best we can to put these physics into words in the ways that make sense to our brains, but not everyone's brains are the same, and everyone's gonna learn differently. Everyone's gonna have a different way of learning that's gonna click with them, make the most sense. And everyone's gonna have different ways of explaining these things that fill in different gaps within this full picture of the movement of these things. So my main recommendation, whether you're trying to think about foot position, whether you're trying to learn a new trick, is just watch as many videos as you can. Jake Leary has a fantastic video on foot placement that talks about all of the stuff that I've talked about plus more. And that video made me think about a lot of foot placement things when I was first playing around with different foot placement like a year and a half ago. Yeah, just keep watching technique videos, and at some point you'll really feel it click, and you'll know when you feel it click. And that's what I call like when you unlock the trick, right? Unlock doesn't mean that you've perfected it. Unlock just means that you feel the feeling in your body rather than just having it in your brain. And so the thing that we're trying to do while practicing any one-wheeling technique is get it to that place where we understand it enough in our brain that it clicks in our body. And that's when you can actually start learning and improving and perfecting and making it feel even more natural. Yeah, so I think that's really the most important thing, is just like, don't go hard on yourself if it's not coming easily. Don't go hard on yourself if it's taking a long time for it to really click. Because it might just be that you haven't heard it explained in the way that's gonna make sense to your brain. I think something that I wish that somebody had explained more in detail when I first started riding was really talking about the fact that there is no one way to ride. Like there's not a best way. There's not a best way to have your feet positioned. There's not a best way to lean. There's some general best practices, such as moving your hip out instead of leaning your body forward. But that doesn't make you a better rider if you ride that way. It just means that you're probably a little bit more likely to be able to recover from a nosedive if you keep your center of gravity over the wheel. But when you see people racing, their bodies are way out over the board. So obviously these things aren't rules. There really are no rules in one-wheeling. That's the great part. It's such an intuitive feeling machine, which means that everybody is gonna have a different riding style, just as unique as their bodies are, and as unique as their minds are. So yeah, just go explore, you know? Oh, so I guess, yeah, that's it. To finish off, check out this gorgeous view. And don't forget to go out and have a nice ride. If you can't go out tonight, go out tomorrow. If you can't go out tomorrow, make plans on the weekend. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.